It wasn't just a shove. It was a line in the sand. And when that line was crossed, the WNBA didn't just react. It responded in a way that made every player in the league sit up a little straighter. Because what happened that night wasn't about 6 seconds of contact. It wasn't about one hard foul. It wasn't even just about Caitlin Clark. It was about power, growth, money, image, control. And whether one player had quietly run out of chances long before the cameras caught her shoulder moving forward. From the outside, it looked simple. A regular season game, a heated moment, a rookie superstar, a veteran competitor. Tension boiled over. Contact was made. But if you think this story started in Indiana, you're already behind. Because punishments this decisive don't come out of nowhere. They build. They stack. They wait. And when the hammer finally drops, it usually means the league was watching for much longer than anyone realized. The WNBA is in the middle of the biggest growth phase in its history. Ratings are climbing. Arenas are selling out. Merchandise is flying. Corporate sponsors are circling. Networks are paying attention in a way they haven't before. And at the center of that surge is a rookie who changed the math of the entire league. So when that rookie hit the floor, the reaction wasn't just emotional. It was strategic. What followed wasn't just discipline. It felt like a message. But here's what makes this story complicated and dangerous. The shove may have been the spark, but the explosion? That had been building for years. And to understand why the league moved the way it did, we have to go back to that moment. Slow it down. Strip away the noise. And ask the question nobody wanted to ask out loud. Was this really about one play? Or was this the moment the WNBA decided exactly what kind of future it wanted? Let's rewind. It was supposed to be just another regular season game. Indiana Fever versus Chicago Sky. On paper, it wasn't a playoff matchup. It wasn't a rivalry decades in the making. It wasn't a championship decider. But it felt bigger than that. Because everywhere Caitlin Clark goes, the temperature rises. The arena that night wasn't half full. It wasn't quiet. It was electric. You could feel it in the noise before tip-off, in the jerseys in the crowd, in the phones already recording warm-ups, in the way fans leaned forward every time Clark touched the ball. The WNBA had been climbing, slowly, steadily. But this season, it was different. The cameras lingered longer. The broadcast felt sharper. The energy felt national. And Clark, whether you love her or roll your eyes at the hype, was at the center of it. She wasn't just playing well. She was bending defenses, pulling defenders 3 feet beyond the arc, threading passes that forced rotations a split second too late. The Fever were building momentum possession by possession. Chicago wasn't just losing ground. They were scrambling. And frustration has a way of showing itself long before something actually happens. You could see it in the defensive breakdowns, in the late closeouts, in the subtle gestures, hands thrown up, glances exchanged, communication breaking down. This wasn't just about the score. It was about control. Because on a night with this many eyes watching, nobody wants to look helpless. Then it happened. No loose ball. No contested layup. No fight for position in the paint. Caitlin Clark didn't even have the ball. Chennedy Carter approached from the side. 1 step, 2 steps, and then shoulder. Full force. Direct. Clark hit the floor hard. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just sudden. And the sound inside the arena changed instantly. It wasn't outrage at first. It was silence. The kind of silence that spreads before your brain fully processes what your eyes just saw. Players froze. Coaches stopped mid-sentence. Even the referees seemed half a second behind the moment. Because this didn't look like basketball. It looked intentional. The replay only made it worse. Slow motion removes excuses. Angle after angle showed the same thing. No play on the ball. No attempt at a defensive action. No split-second miscalculation. Just a choice. And here's the part that made it different. Carter didn't look surprised by what she did. There was no immediate reach to help Clark up. No hand extended. No quick my bad. She turned and walked away. Like it was routine. Meanwhile, Clark got up. No theatrics. No prolonged argument. She dusted herself off and went back to her spot. That contrast hit harder than the shove itself. One player escalated. One absorbed it. The broadcast team hesitated with their words. You could hear it. Analysts choosing phrases carefully. Not wanting to inflame it, but not able to ignore it. Social media didn't hesitate. Clips were circulating before the free throws were taken. Within minutes, the play had gone from arena incident to national debate. Was it targeting? Was it jealousy? Was it physical play being overblown? Or was it something deeper? Because context matters. This wasn't just any player on the floor. This was the league's most visible rookie. The player driving ticket sales in cities that hadn't seen sellouts in years. The player networks were quietly building promotional campaigns around. And she had just been knocked to the hardwood in a way that didn't look accidental. The rest of the game continued, but something had shifted. Every possession felt heavier. Every whistle louder. Every camera shot more intentional. But here's what most people missed in real time. League officials were watching too. And not casually. Because when you're in a growth phase like this, when corporate partners are evaluating brand safety, when advertisers are monitoring tone, when executives are measuring public perception, moments like this are not just about fouls. They're about optics. And optics can change business. By the time the final buzzer sounded, the play had already been dissected frame by frame online. Former players weighed in. Commentators debated intent. Fans picked sides instantly. But inside the league office, the conversation likely sounded very different. Not was it a hard foul, but what message does this send? Because the WNBA wasn't just reacting to contact. It was reacting to momentum. And when you're building something fragile and valuable at the same time, you don't allow chaos to define it. That night, in 6 seconds, Chennedy didn't just shove a rookie. She forced the league to choose how it wanted to respond in front of the entire sports world. And what happened next would prove this was never going to be treated like an ordinary flagrant foul. Because the speed and weight of the reaction suggested something else entirely. This wasn't just about what happened on the court. It was about what had been building behind it. And if you thought the silence in that arena was loud, wait until you see how loud the league's response became. The next 24 hours were quiet. Too quiet. No immediate dramatic announcement. No emotional press conference from the league. Just a routine post-game recap and a standard initial ruling. Common foul. That's how it was first labeled. And for a few hours, it looked like this would follow the familiar script. Debate on sports shows. Social media arguments. Maybe a fine. Maybe a small upgrade after review. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Because when a play goes viral at the speed this one did, it stops being just a basketball issue. It becomes a brand issue. By morning, the clip had been replayed millions of times. Sports networks looped it between segments. National personalities weighed in. Even people who don't normally watch WNBA games had an opinion. And that matters. The WNBA isn't operating in a vacuum anymore. It's in the middle of a growth surge that executives have been waiting decades to see. Ratings up nearly 90%. Attendance climbing. Corporate sponsorship conversations expanding. The league was finally stepping into national relevance. And national relevance brings scrutiny. So when the league office released its updated ruling, the tone was different. The foul was upgraded. Flagrant. Intentional. Language carefully chosen. It wasn't dramatic on the surface. No lifetime ban. No explosive headline phrasing. But the wording carried weight. The kind of wording that says, "We saw this, and we're not treating it lightly." And here's what made it significant: the speed. League reviews can take time. Weeks sometimes. But this one moved quickly. Deliberately. Which raises a question most people didn't ask. Was this about punishing a moment? Or was this about protecting momentum? Because timing is everything. If this same shove happens 3 years ago, in a half-empty arena, with minimal national attention, does it land the same way? Maybe. Maybe not. But context shapes consequences. And context, in this moment, was massive. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another rookie absorbing physical play. She was the centerpiece of a media wave the league had never experienced before. Her games were drawing viewership spikes. Merchandise was selling at historic rates. Road games were selling out arenas that hadn't seen that kind of demand in years. Corporate sponsors were watching carefully. Networks were watching carefully. And so was the league. Because here's the reality of modern sports. Growth phases are fragile. One wrong narrative can derail momentum. One storyline can shift perception. And the last thing the WNBA needed at that moment was a viral clip that suggested chaos, hostility, or lack of control. So when discipline came down, it felt precise. Measured. Strategic. Not emotional. And that's what made it powerful. The message wasn't loud. It was clear. There's a difference. The league didn't over-explain, didn't drag it out, didn't create a spectacle. It acted. And when leagues act quickly, it usually means one of two things. Either the decision was obvious, or the groundwork had already been laid. Because truly reactive discipline tends to wobble. It hesitates. It debates publicly. It leaks uncertainty. This didn't feel uncertain. It felt prepared, which leads to something deeper. Punishments that look simple from the outside often sit on top of history. Layers of conversations, internal evaluations, quiet warnings. And the speed of this decision suggested something more than just outrage over 6 seconds of contact. It suggested familiarity. Familiarity with a pattern. Familiarity with a name. Familiarity with a file that may have been thicker than fans realized. And while the public debated whether the league was protecting its star, executives were likely asking a different question entirely. What kind of culture are we building right now? Because this isn't the WNBA of 10 years ago. It's negotiating bigger media deals. It's expanding global reach. It's stepping into a financial era that demands stability. And stability doesn't tolerate volatility easily, especially not publicly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The league didn't just discipline Carter. It elevated the meaning of the moment. The upgrade wasn't just about severity. It was about symbolism. It told every veteran watching, the old standards might not apply anymore. It told every rookie watching, this is a new era. And it told every corporate partner watching, we are in control. That's the part that doesn't make highlight reels. But it might be the most important part of the story. Because professional sports leagues don't just manage games. They manage narratives. And narratives shape money. And money shapes decisions. Now here's the uncomfortable question. Was the shove reckless? Yes. Was it unnecessary? Most would say so. But was it uniquely worse than physical plays we've seen before? That's where the debate gets complicated. Because the WNBA has always been physical. Hard screens, tough defense, emotional rivalries, heated exchanges. But this moment didn't land in an ordinary season. It landed in the most commercially sensitive season the league has ever had. And that changes everything. The punishment wasn't about eliminating physicality. It was about eliminating unpredictability. Because unpredictability threatens growth. And growth is the priority. Which brings us to something nobody wanted to say out loud. If the league moved this decisively, this confidently, it probably wasn't deciding Carter's fate in real time. It was confirming it. And that's where the story shifts. Because if this wasn't the beginning, then we have to look at what came before. And once you start pulling that thread, you realize the shove may have been the spark. But the powder keg had been sitting there for years. And in the next section, we're going to open that file. Because the pattern, it didn't start in Indiana. It started long before anyone was counting viewership numbers. Here's the part that makes this uncomfortable. Because it's easy to frame everything around one play. One shove. One bad decision. One heated moment. But organizations, especially professional sports organizations, rarely make major decisions based on one moment alone. They make them based on accumulation. And when you look back at Chennedy Carter's career, a picture starts forming that's harder to ignore. Let's rewind to 2020. Atlanta Dream. 4th overall pick. Electric scorer. Explosive first step. Fearless shot creator. The kind of talent that makes front offices feel like they stole something special. Draft night optimism was real. Analysts praised her upside. Coaches talked about building around her. Fans saw a future star. And early on, the talent translated. She made the all-rookie team. She showed flashes of brilliance, bursts of offense that few defenders could contain. But professional basketball isn't just about talent. It's about ecosystem, locker rooms, film sessions, practice intensity, communication. That's where the first cracks reportedly appeared. In 2021, Atlanta suspended Carter for conduct detrimental to the team. That phrase sounds clean, professional, but in sports language, it's loaded. It means something happened that the organization felt crossed an internal line. Details were never fully aired publicly. And that's normal. Teams protect their internal matters. But what made this suspension notable wasn't just that it happened. It was that it involved tension inside the locker room. One reported confrontation escalated beyond normal teammate friction. And when tension reaches a point where management has to intervene, it doesn't fade quietly. It lingers. It changes how teammates interact. It shifts how coaches distribute trust. It plants doubt. And in professional sports, doubt spreads fast. Atlanta eventually moved on. Carter was traded. Fresh start. New city. New staff. New opportunity to reset perception. Los Angeles Sparks. On paper, this should have been the clean slate. But here's where the story gets interesting. The Sparks didn't just move on after a short trial. They absorbed the financial cost. Reportedly around $90,000 in contract money, significant in a league operating under tight salary cap constraints, to let her go. Pause there. In the NBA, $90,000 might barely move the needle. In the WNBA, that's real cap space. That's rotation depth. That's flexibility. Teams don't eat that kind of money lightly, especially not for performance reasons alone, which raises the obvious question. What costs more than $90,000 to keep? Because teams will tolerate difficult personalities if production outweighs friction. They'll navigate tension if the talent demands it. But when two separate organizations reach similar conclusions, that's when pattern becomes harder to dismiss. And here's the thing. None of this means Carter wasn't talented. In fact, that's what makes it more complicated. She was talented, dynamic, competitive, intense. But intensity without alignment can destabilize environments. And sports organizations, especially in growth phases, prioritize chemistry almost as much as skill. Now fast forward to Chicago. Another opportunity, another reset, new teammates, new system, new chance to control the narrative. On the surface, things looked stable. She was playing, contributing, competing. But if you look closely, and fans always look closely now, subtle signs started surfacing. Social media is often dismissed as noise. But inside modern locker rooms, it's signal. Cryptic posts about knowing your role. Subtle unfollows. Absences from bonding content. Nothing explosive. Nothing headline-worthy. But enough to raise eyebrows among those paying attention. Individually, these things mean little. Collectively, they hint. And here's the key. When patterns repeat across cities, across coaching staffs, across teammates, it becomes harder to attribute everything to coincidence. Professional athletes change teams all the time. But culture friction that follows you? That's different. Now let's step back. None of this was front-page drama before Indiana. No league-wide outrage. No national debates. Just internal management. Quiet course corrections. Second chances. Third chances. Because leagues believe in development. But development requires something specific. Adjustment. Self-reflection. Growth. And this is where perception becomes powerful. When the shove happened, it didn't land in isolation. It landed on top of history. League executives didn't just see a rookie hit the floor. They saw context. They saw prior reports. They saw internal files. They saw precedent. And when you connect those dots, the speed of the punishment starts making more sense. Because maybe, just maybe, the decision wasn't being made that night. Maybe it had been slowly forming over time, waiting for a moment clear enough to justify action. That's how organizations work. They tolerate until they can't. They monitor until something forces clarity. And when clarity arrives publicly, they move decisively. The shove wasn't just physical contact. It was confirmation. Confirmation of a risk. Confirmation of instability. Confirmation that in a season where optics mattered more than ever, volatility couldn't be ignored. But here's where the story shifts again. Because internal history explains league reaction. But it doesn't explain something else. The silence. The silence from inside Carter's own locker room. And in the WNBA, that silence might be louder than anything the league said. In most professional sports leagues, when a player gets disciplined, something predictable happens. Teammates speak up. They defend. They soften the narrative. They say things like, "That's not who she is," or "We've got her back," or "It was just a competitive moment." Especially in the WNBA. Because this league has a long-standing culture of solidarity. Players advocate for each other publicly. They protect one another. They stand together when the spotlight turns harsh. It's part of the league's identity. So when Chennedy Carter was disciplined, people waited. They waited for the quotes. They waited for the locker room defense. They waited for anyone, to step in and say the punishment was too much. And then something unusual happened. Nothing. No public outrage from teammates. No strong character references. No carefully worded, "We support her growth" statements. Just silence. And in this league, silence isn't neutral. Silence is a position. Because defending a teammate doesn't require attacking the league. It doesn't require controversy. It just requires presence. And presence never came. That absence raised eyebrows inside media circles immediately. Because WNBA players are not shy about speaking up. They're thoughtful, vocal, and unified when they feel something is unfair. But here, nothing. Which suggests one of two possibilities. Either the locker room fully agreed with the league's response, or they were too exhausted to fight it. Neither interpretation helps Carter. And then there was Angel Reese. Now this is where social media became louder than any press conference. Before the incident, Reese and Carter appeared close. Public interactions. Smiles at team events. Social energy that felt genuine. It looked like a friendship. And fans noticed those dynamics. So when within hours of the shove going viral, Reese quietly unfollowed Carter across platforms, it wasn't random. It was noticed immediately. In modern sports culture, unfollowing someone isn't accidental. It's deliberate. It's public. And it sends a signal. Reese didn't post a statement. Didn't write a paragraph. Didn't escalate drama. She just created distance. Clean. Immediate. Visible. That kind of move doesn't happen without thought. And whether it was personal disappointment, strategic separation, or locker room alignment, the effect was the same. It showed separation. Now zoom out. Teammate silence. Public distancing. No counter-narrative forming from inside the organization. That's rare. Especially in a league built on collective strength. Because here's the thing. If teammates believed Carter was being unfairly targeted, someone would have said it. Even subtly. Even anonymously. Even carefully. But instead, the locker room doors stayed closed. And closed doors can say a lot. Some observers pointed to earlier signs. Subtle social media shifts before Indiana. Carter missing from certain bonding posts. Cryptic captions from teammates about respecting the game. Individually, these details mean very little. But layered together, they form something more telling. They suggest this wasn't the first internal tension. And when internal tension exists long enough, teammates eventually choose emotional distance over confrontation. That's human nature. Now think about it from the league's perspective. If Carter's own locker room isn't publicly pushing back, if no internal advocates are stepping forward, if the people closest to the situation are staying quiet, it becomes easier to move decisively, because resistance isn't forming. And in professional sports, internal support often influences external discipline. If a player has strong locker room backing, organizations hesitate. If that backing is weak, the path becomes clearer. Silence creates space. Space for decisions. Space for finality. And here's what makes this part powerful. The shove happened in front of thousands. The discipline happened in headlines. But the silence happened in whispers. And whispers often carry more truth than shouting. Because if this had truly been an isolated moment, if Carter had been viewed universally as misunderstood but valued, if the locker room believed the punishment went too far, the reaction would have looked very different. Instead, the story felt accepted. Not celebrated. Not condemned. Just absorbed. Like something that had been building finally reached its inevitable point. But there was still one more moment. One moment Carter fully controlled. One moment where she could have shifted the tone. Reset perception. Slow the momentum against her. And that moment came in front of microphones. And what happened there may have sealed everything. There's a window after every controversy. A small one. A fragile one. But powerful. It's the window where perception can be redirected. Where tone can be softened. Where accountability can interrupt escalation. Chennedy Carter had that window. And it lasted about 30 seconds. The post-game press conference wasn't packed with chaos. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hostile. It was routine. Microphones set up. Reporters seated. Cameras rolling. And everyone in the room knew what the first question would be. Because when something goes viral mid-game, the press conference becomes the second act. It's where the athlete gets to add context. Add emotion. Add humanity. Or remove it. Carter walked in. Arms crossed. Body language closed. The room felt heavy before the first question was even asked. Now, body language isn't everything. But in high-pressure moments, it becomes part of the message. A reporter asked directly about the play. Clear. Neutral. Opportunity. Carter's response was short. It's just basketball. It happened. I'm focused on the next game. No elaboration. No reflection. No visible regret. And here's where nuance matters. She didn't explode. She didn't rant. She didn't attack Clark. But she didn't acknowledge anything either. No, I crossed a line. No, I'll learn from it. No, I respect her. Just dismissal. And in normal circumstances, maybe that would have been enough. But this wasn't normal. The clip was already everywhere. Debates were forming nationally. The league was in a growth surge, and perception was fragile. Reporters pressed slightly further. Asked if she had regrets about not addressing it sooner. Carter doubled down. No. Short. Firm. Closed. And in that moment, something shifted. Because professional sports is as much about optics as performance. Fans don't expect perfection. They expect accountability. And when accountability doesn't show up publicly, interpretation fills the gap. Executives were watching. Sponsors were watching. Teammates were watching. And in an era where every word is clipped, replayed, dissected, silence can feel like defiance. Now here's the important part. The shove was the trigger. But the press conference defined the narrative. Before that moment, there was debate. Was it competitive intensity? Was it frustration boiling over? Was it just physical play blown out of proportion? After that moment, the debate narrowed. It became about attitude, about awareness, about whether Carter understood the scale of what had just happened. Because this wasn't a preseason scuffle. This wasn't a low-visibility game. This was national. And when you're part of a league experiencing record attention, your response matters more than ever. One veteran sports reporter later described the room as deflated. Not angry, not explosive, just heavy, like something irreversible had just happened. And here's why that matters. Leagues want to discipline behavior. They don't want to eliminate talent. They want correction, growth, adjustments. But growth requires acknowledgement. And when acknowledgement doesn't come, the league is left with a different choice. Distance. Because distance protects the brand. Now imagine being inside the league office. You've seen the shove. You've reviewed the angles. You've monitored the social reaction. You've read prior internal notes from previous organizations. And then you watch that press conference. No remorse. No recalibration. No sign of understanding. That doesn't just influence discipline. It influences confidence in future behavior. And confidence is everything. Because professional sports leagues aren't just managing games. They're managing predictability. They need to know their players won't become recurring crises. When a player shows talent but struggles with alignment, teams can work with that. When a player shows volatility but also growth, teams invest in that. But when a player shows volatility without visible self-correction, that's where risk calculus changes. And in this moment, Carter didn't calm the storm. She validated it, even if unintentionally. And perception doesn't care about intent. It cares about impact. Those 30 seconds became replayed almost as much as the shove itself. Clipped, analyzed, debated, and slowly, the narrative shifted from hard foul to pattern confirmed. Now, whether that's fair or not is subjective. But in professional sports, fairness and optics don't always align. And here's the hardest truth of this entire story. If Carter had opened that press conference differently, if she had simply said, I let my emotions get the best of me. I respect Caitlin. I'll be better. This entire arc might feel different. But she didn't. And in modern sports, small responses carry enormous consequences. Because we are in the era of amplification, where a sentence can cost millions, where tone can outweigh talent, where perception can outrun performance. And while Carter was standing firm in front of microphones, Caitlin Clark was doing something very different. Something quieter. Something strategic. Something that made the contrast impossible to ignore. And that contrast may have influenced the league more than anyone wants to admit. While Chennedy Carter was standing firm in front of microphones, Caitlin Clark was doing something else entirely. She was lowering the temperature. And that difference mattered more than anyone said out loud. Because after getting shoved to the floor on national television, Clark had options. She could have escalated. She could have added fuel. She could have hinted at disrespect. She could have leaned into the narrative forming around her. Instead, she kept repeating the same theme. I'm here to play basketball. It's about the team. We move forward. Short answers. No emotion. No drama. No visible resentment. And in the modern media ecosystem, restraint becomes a statement. Because controversy drives clicks. Conflict drives engagement. But composure drives trust. And the league, whether intentionally or not, was watching two completely different approaches unfold in real time. One player minimized, the other dismissed. That distinction feels subtle, but in a growth phase, subtle differences become amplified. Now zoom out. The WNBA is experiencing the most commercially sensitive moment in its history. Viewership surging. Arenas selling out in cities that struggled for attendance in prior seasons. National sports debate shows discussing WNBA storylines daily. Merchandise sales hitting numbers that were once considered unrealistic. And Caitlin Clark sits at the center of that expansion. Not alone, but undeniably central. Her presence changes ticket pricing, changes broadcast scheduling, changes promotional investment. Corporate sponsors are attaching campaigns to her visibility. Networks are tracking her ratings impact closely. And that doesn't mean the league revolves around one player. But it does mean the league understands momentum. And momentum needs stability. Now consider the optics. On one side, a rookie absorbing contact, redirecting interviews, focusing on performance. On the other, a veteran with prior internal friction history, appearing unmoved by public perception. Executives don't just evaluate talent. They evaluate alignment. Alignment with growth. Alignment with culture. Alignment with long-term direction. And in that comparison, whether fair or not, the contrast became sharp. Clark's composure wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was disciplined. And discipline is brand-friendly. Sponsors don't invest in volatility. They invest in predictability, in professionalism, in players who minimize headlines rather than create them. Now here's where things get uncomfortable. Did the league choose Clark over Carter? Not explicitly. But growth phases often create implicit choices. You protect what drives expansion. You isolate what threatens it. Not emotionally. Strategically, because professional leagues are businesses first. Emotions fill arenas, but revenue sustains them. And when executives saw two players respond to the same moment in opposite ways, the direction probably became clearer. One looked like the future. The other looked like risk. Now pause. This doesn't erase Carter's talent. It doesn't erase her competitiveness. It doesn't erase the physical intensity that's always been part of basketball. But in this era, this specific season, optics weren't optional. They were everything. The WNBA isn't just trying to grow. It's trying to grow sustainably, which means attracting corporate dollars that require image stability. And when you're negotiating media rights deals and sponsorship expansions, the last thing you want trending is uncontrolled chaos. That's the layer most fans never see. Because fans see competition. Executives see trajectory. And trajectory requires consistency. Clark became a symbol of that consistency. Not because she's flawless. Not because she's untouchable. But because her response aligned with the direction the league wants to project. Professional. Focused. Unshakable. Now imagine being a league executive comparing these two press conferences side by side. Comparing social media reactions. Comparing sponsor feedback. Comparing long-term risk assessments. The decision-making process becomes less about a shove and more about the future. Because the WNBA isn't just protecting a rookie. It's protecting momentum. And momentum doesn't survive instability. Which leads to the final, uncomfortable layer of this story. Was Carter punished solely for contact? Or was she punished for not fitting the league's next chapter? Because sometimes in sports, eras shift quietly. And players who thrived in one environment struggle in another. The league today isn't the league of 5 years ago. It's bigger, faster, more visible, less forgiving. And visibility magnifies consequences. Which leaves one final question hanging over all of this. Is this truly the end for Carter? Or is it a crossroads? Because talent like hers doesn't disappear. But opportunity? Opportunity shrinks fast when perception hardens. And once doors close in a league this small, reopening them becomes exponentially harder. So where does this leave Chennedy Carter? Because talent like hers doesn't just evaporate overnight. Explosiveness like that doesn't disappear. Scoring instincts don't vanish. At 25 years old, she's still physically in her prime. Still capable. Still skilled. But professional sports careers aren't built on ability alone. They're built on access. And access is fragile. The WNBA is a small league. Roster spots are limited. Salary cap space is tight. Franchises can't afford long-term volatility. Which means once perception shifts, recovery becomes uphill. Now technically, doors aren't locked forever. International leagues exist. Europe, Turkey, Australia. Overseas basketball has revived careers before. But the global market isn't what it used to be. 5 years ago, talent could outweigh baggage. Today, organizations evaluate personality as heavily as production. Because international teams don't just buy skill. They buy chemistry. They buy stability. They buy reputation. And reputation now travels instantly. Search results don't disappear. Clips don't fade. Press conferences don't vanish. They live online. Forever. Now consider the financial implications. The average WNBA contract isn't NBA money. Every deal matters. Every endorsement matters. Every extension matters. And when controversy attaches itself publicly, sponsors hesitate. Brands are risk-averse. They avoid uncertainty. Even rumored endorsement negotiations can collapse quickly when public perception shifts. Some projections estimated Carter's long-term earning potential, contracts, sponsorships, overseas bonuses, could have climbed into the multi-million range over her career. That future now feels uncertain. Not impossible, but uncertain. And uncertainty in professional sports often equals reduction. Reduction in opportunity. Reduction in leverage. Reduction in trust. Now here's the part nobody likes to talk about. This wasn't about one shove. It wasn't about one press conference. It wasn't about one locker room moment. It was about accumulation. And accumulation catches up eventually. Because professional leagues will tolerate mistakes. They'll tolerate emotion. They'll tolerate intensity. But they won't tolerate unpredictability during growth phases. And that's what makes this story bigger than Carter. This is about the WNBA entering a new era. An era where visibility changes consequences. An era where brand matters more than ever. An era where composure is currency. And the league made it clear, whether explicitly or not, that the future belongs to players who align with that direction. Now here's the question that lingers. Can Carter reset? Yes, but it requires something specific. Public growth. Visible accountability. Time. Silence. Work. Rebuilding trust doesn't happen through statements. It happens through consistency, through humility, through proving that volatility has been replaced with maturity. And that's hard, especially when public perception hardens quickly. But redemption arcs aren't impossible. Sports history is filled with them. The difference? Those arcs usually begin with acknowledgement, with ownership, with self-correction. And that chapter hasn't fully been written yet. Because while the league moves forward, Carter stands at a crossroads. One path leans into defiance. The other leans into recalibration. And only one of those paths reopens doors. Meanwhile, the WNBA continues expanding. Ratings continue climbing. New fans continue arriving. The league's identity continues shifting. And this moment, this incident, will likely be remembered not just as a controversial play, but as a turning point, a signal, a reminder. That talent gets you drafted, but professionalism keeps you employed. That intensity excites crowds, but alignment secures futures. That in the modern sports era, perception can weigh as much as performance. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not about Carter, not about Clark, but about the evolution of a league stepping into national prominence. Because growth changes standards, visibility changes tolerance, and when the spotlight gets brighter, the margin for error gets thinner. Now here's the bigger question. 5 years from now, will this moment be remembered as the end of a career, or the beginning of a hard-earned redemption? That part hasn't been decided yet. But one thing is certain. The league drew a line, and everyone felt it. If you want breakdowns that go beyond headlines, if you want the deeper layers the mainstream debates won't touch, if you want analysis that connects the business, the culture, and the on-court drama, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next shift in this league, it's already building, and you won't want to miss it.